of a publisher or the mere fact that someone was willing to pay to instantiate a book on some mashed up vegetable pulp tells you anything about whether it's true or significant, and the absence of those things also don't tell you about anything, whether a book is true or significant. But anyone who's ever browsed a library discard sale knows that these were always very loose rules of thumb, that there are plenty of books that publishers published and that someone went to the expense of printing that have no truth or significance whatsoever, and that mere rule of thumb is, I think we're better off without it. And this is why it's so silly if you find yourself in the company of the kind of librarian, I think they're vanishing these days, but the kind of librarian who turns up their nose at a patron who says, oh, I'll just look that up on Wikipedia or Google, that full body flinch that some librarians used to have when things like that would say. Because a patron who says, oh, I'm just going to look that up on Google or Wikipedia is not entirely incorrect. There are some subjects where you get better and more significant information from the internet than from a book, but it depends on the book. And it depends on where on the internet you're looking. Good librarians don't try to make their patrons feel guilty for getting their information online. They try to empower them to use the internet in the best and most reliable way. The task of navigating information and authority has gotten both exponentially harder and exponentially more important in the networked age. Why more important? I mean, it's easy to understand why harder, but why more important? Well, in the UK where I live, there's a woman who has had the coolest government job I've ever heard of. Her name is Martha Lane Fox, and her title was Champion for Digital Inclusion. And she's actually now, she's got a cooler job. They made her the Baroness of Soho, which is pretty cool. But when Martha got the gig as Champion for Digital Inclusion, her remit was basically to figure out how to get the country online. And so one of the things she wanted to investigate was what happens when people get online. And she had this naturally occurring living lab with which to study this, because in the industrial north of Britain, or the post-industrial north of Britain, there are these towns that are somewhat analogous to American Rust Belt towns, where the dominant industries have collapsed, and unemployment's very high, and there's a lot of privation, very vulnerable populations, a lot of people on public assistance and living in public housing. And these public housing blocks, which we call council estates or housing estates, in the UK, one of them had a pilot program to get free internet access, and a neighboring one hadn't. And it had been a couple of years. Well, given that nobody had done anything especially special to get the internet access, you now have a fairly well-controlled experiment, two very similar populations, with the major difference between them being that one had internet and the other one didn't. So Martha got PricewaterhouseCoopers to go study them. And what they found, what they found among the people who'd had internet access is that every single thing we use to measure quality of life, to measure the health of a society, goes up for people who have internet access. I mean, everything. It's not just, as you might expect, oh, their kids can do their homework more readily. And that's true, and so their kids were getting better grades, had more access to tertiary education, they were more socially mobile, but the parents also had better jobs. Because although there weren't many jobs, the jobs that were there were much easier to get if you could search for them on the internet rather than walking the streets looking for a help wanted sign. So they had more disposable income, and they had better nutrition, and they were more civically engaged and more politically aware, and more likely to vote. Every single thing we use to measure the health of a society goes up when you give people internet access. So navigating information isn't just harder, it's more important, because being left out of information is even more of a debilitating thing than it's ever been. In the U.S. we have this 6 strikes program where the internet service providers and the big entertainment companies have voluntarily opted into a program where if you're accused of living in the same house as a router that someone has been accused of using to watch TV the wrong way, which is to say you're accused of being somehow implicated in piracy, after 6 of these unsubstantiated accusations, your ISPs can disconnect you. How disproportionate is that, right? We take away the single wire that, that delivers free speech, a free press, freedom of assembly, access to education and tools and community and civic engagement and education and social mobility and good jobs and nutrition and employment and health. We take that all away on the accusation that someone has used your router to watch TV the wrong way. That's just so wildly disproportionate. And in the UK, it's not even a private agreement, it's law. We have the Digital Economy Act that establishes a 3 strikes rule where after 3 accusations, again, you can have your internet taken away. So navigating information, more important than ever. Getting it right, more important than ever. And there's one group of people who have a centuries-old tradition of navigating information and authority, and it's librarians. So really, there's never been a time when the mission of librarianship has been more important than now, the information age. Now, the secret to good navigation is context. Where did this information come from? How is it filtered on the way to you? How does it fit in with other things that you know? And while there's a lot of context that you can get just by looking at the information, you really, to get deep context, have to also understand the infrastructure. How is the network made? What are its regulatory pressures? Who gets to speak on it and how? Who's filtering it before it gets to you? All of those questions are in some ways even more important than questions about who said this, or where was it said, or when was it said. How was it said? Who stopped you from finding an alternate point of view, and how and by what technical means? Those are really vital questions if you're going to be literate about information. You know, there's a reason that in the old days, sword fighters didn't just study fighting with their swords. They learned how to make swords. Because if you're going to be a really badass samurai, you need to know how the sword was made in order to know how to effectively swing the sword. Which brings me to hack spaces, and particularly hack spaces in libraries. We can call them hacker spaces or maker spaces or fab labs or hack spaces. I call it hack spaces because the London hack space used to be above my office, so that's what I got in the habit of saying. And as you might gather from the fact that there's a London hack space, in fact, several hack spaces in London, there are hack spaces all over the world, small towns, big ones. Big companies are opening them up inside universities, library schools, and libraries are starting to put hack spaces inside of them. And a hack space, to me, the most salient fact about it is it's a place where networked making takes place. So what's networked making? Well, it's not the kind of making that we had in, say, the post-war era. I have a friend, Mr. Jalopy, who, if you read Make magazine, you'll have read his columns. And he lives in East LA, and every Saturday for the last 20 years, he's gone yard sailing in Burbank. And he's visited almost every house in Burbank. And those are all post-war builds. They're all, you know, your basic split-level, kind of Brady Bunchy Burbank houses, exactly what you think of when you think of a California post-war. Every single one of them has a workshop in the garage. Snap-on tools. He's got like 9 complete sets of Snap-on tools. But, you know, that kind of making, that making where you get like Popular Mechanics in the mail and then you try to decipher a recipe in the garage is not what I'm talking about here. Networked making is really different. The way networked making works is it's not that you start with a project that you've read about in a magazine, or you start with a thing that you need to do and you've read somewhere, you know where you can go and find the instructions in your books, your complete time-life set of home workshop projects. Instead, you have an idea for something that may be something no one's ever done before. And you go online and you find someone who's solved 80% of your problem, someone who's almost gotten there. And you look at what they've done, and you ask questions online about what they're doing, and you ask questions in online forums, digital forums about what they're doing. You clarify what's going on with your problem. You log your solution as you go through it, not just because you're a good-hearted slob who wants to take part in network making, but because the effective way of learning how to bridge that final 20% is talking with people online. Even if they're in the same makerspace as you, chances are you're using the wiki to reach everybody, not just the people who happen to be hanging around at the moment that you're trying to figure out how to get this to stick to that. And so when you're done, that remaining 20% is now online. And it's there for the next person to study, the next person to use as the basis for their project. And that networked making has been an enormous accelerator for the making practice that, after all, has been around for a very long time. I mean, you know, suiting a tool to the fit of your hand has some like essential human dignity, right? Like not using the tool that's merely the lowest common denominator that can be made so that it's not too terrible for everyone to use is infinitely less interesting than modifying that tool so that it's perfect for you to use. That's why, you know, we revere the patina of the axe handle after it's molded itself to your grip, right? So there's this amazing practice that's been on and on for as long as, you know, we've had tools, but networked making has been such an enormous bucket of fantastic gasoline on that fire. You know, it's been really taking off ever since. And networked making is not just about solving serious problems, and it's not just about play, it's about both. So when you go to a maker fair, you can see like incredibly playful projects. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the useless machine. If you Google it, if you go to YouTube and look at useless machines, it's a box and it has a switch. And when you flip the switch, the lid of the box pops open, a little hand comes out and flips the switch back the other way, and the hand goes back in. Right? So useless machines have been around forever. They're a great old, mechanical project, electromechanical project. But thanks to network making, there is every variety and variation on useless machines you've ever seen. There's one, my colleague on Boing Boing, Mark, blogged it last week, that after you flip the switch a certain number of times, hidden wheels spread out of the bottom, and it skirts away from you as though it doesn't want to be switched again. So, this is the playful side of making, but there's also, that playfulness is in the service of a real-world literacy about devices and networks. And so sometimes you see it solving real-world problems. You see people who are developing teaching tools, people who are automating their home gardens, people who are doing all kinds of things that solve a real-world problem that they have right now. And you also see people doing really entrepreneurial things. So makerspaces, hackspaces are famous incubators of entrepreneurial projects. Pinterest, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of and used, came out of an amazing hackspace in Mountain View called Hacker Dojo. And it was just, hackers hanging around the makerspace, had an idea for Pinterest, and built it right there on site. Now, every hackspace that I've ever been to has enormous shelves full of disposable, obsolete, broken, surplus e-waste. Stuff that isn't needed anymore, stuff that might go on to be part of something new and wonderful. Because we're drowning in e-waste. The dark corollary of Moore's law that says computers double in power every 18 months is that old computers double in uselessness every 18 months. And so e-waste mounds up, in huge, untenable, unsustainable masses all around us. But there's something incredibly liberating about learning to do stuff with hardware working on garbage. Because the worst thing that could happen if you get it wrong is you put it back where you found it and get another one out of the trash. Computers are great to learn on because we've always had Control-Z, right? The worst thing that happens with a computer, maybe you reinstall the OS, maybe you have to undo what you've done, but it's really hard to break a computer. And a lot of people, when the first generation of kids with personal computers in their house were kind of growing up, noticed that they were fearless about their computers. Because they could just reinstall the OS, they could recover their backups, they could Control-Z out of whatever it is they were doing and get back to where they needed to be. And the next best thing to Control-Z in hardware is knowing that, you can just throw it in the trash and get another one. In fact, I mentioned Mr. Jalopy before. He's the single best mechanic I know. The way he taught himself to be a mechanic was by buying $100 junkers in LA, which is the thing you get to do if you live in LA, and breaking them one after another. If you want to double your success rate, you triple your failure rate. And he became the best mechanic I know. So what happens when you combine the insights of Martha Lane Fox and her research on the impact of networks and devices on the most vulnerable people in the world with hackerspaces and libraries and e-waste? I think it opens the possibility for an incredible new way of continuing the mission of librarianship in the networked age, something beyond a mere internet cafe with books. Imagine instead if any patron who wanted to could just turn up, work with the other patrons and with hacker librarians to build their own computers out of garbage, to learn how networks work, and then, rather than getting internet access at the library, getting a computer they take home with them from the library. Imagine if libraries became hubs of e-waste recycling, deep information literacy, technical training, and creative entrepreneurial activity. Now, that may sound intimidating, but if your town is a hackerspace, you can just reach out to them and start small with a joint night, or give them a spare meeting room to hold PC building workshops in. Provide a gateway to the kind of fearless spirit and agency that comes from knowing that you built your own machine, installed your own free open operating system like a new Linux on it, and that you know exactly what it's doing. Even breaking things, even just taking them apart, is a powerful and subversive and empowering act. There's a wonderful teacher at NYU in the ITP program, the Interactive Technologies program, named Natalie Jeremijenko. And Natalie has this project she's been doing for years and years called Feral Robot Dogs. And what Natalie does with her feral dogs she goes down to Toys R Us or Walmart. She buys a huge bag full of like $10 to $15 robot dogs, and they do silly things like spin around in circles and bark the national anthem, that sort of thing. And the idea is to teach students to make them into off-road vehicles and then attach volatile organic compound sensors to them so that they follow concentration gradients and converge on VOCs in public spaces, because when the EPA gives your local park a clean bill of health, the way that they do it is by having a guy in a lab coat produce a clipboard full of numbers that an expert has to interpret. And if you're going to go play in that park or let your kids play in there, it'd be nice if there was some other sign you could use to figure out if he was right. And, you know, dogs converging on hotspots tells you when there's stuff that the EPA has missed. And in fact, she does this with all kinds of kids. She did it with, most famously, with a group of inner city kids, high school kids, 17-year-olds, near Starlight Park in the Bronx. And Starlight's a former Con Ed Superfund site that had been given a clean bill of health by the EPA. And the robot dogs that Natalie made found the reason that all these kids' parents had cancer, because the EPA had not done its job there, and Starlight Park had to be cleaned up again because of this. So it's totally awesome. That's not the part. That's just background. The thing I want to tell you about is what Natalie does when they open these things up. Because every class that opens up the robot dogs, the first thing they do is they open them up and they look at the solder. Now, if the solder is blobby and irregular, it was done by hand. There's only one labor force in the world that does that kind of fine work by hand, and that's children. If it's super regular and neat, it was done by a robot. By tracking country of origin and whether or not robots or humans built these things year on year, they have a picture of child labor conditions around the Pacific Rim for the last 10 years, right? Super cool. Taking stuff apart is an incredibly empowering act. Finding out the clockwork inside the universe is an amazing thing to do. There's a great makerspace in Toronto called makerkids.ca, and last summer they invited me to come in, and I went in with my daughter who was 4 and her cousin Jackson who was 5. And the thing that they do to induct people into Maker Kids is they say, look, there's a pile of electric toys over there. Why don't you take some of them apart? You know, we've got like hammers, saws, screwdrivers, cutting torches, go to it. So Jackson, he grabs this Wall-E robot toy and he takes it to bits, right? So that was pretty cool. And the guy said, right, what do you want to do now? We've got all these other toys. Do you want to do something new with it? He said, yeah, there's that toy with the big muscly arms, like a He-Man toy. I want to put the arms on instead of Wall-E's arms. So he said, well, first we've got to put Wall-E back together. So Jackson figured out how to put Wall-E back together. That was super cool. And then he had to figure out how to attach these arms. And it's a complicated thing. For one of them, they drilled it out and they put a machine screw or a wood screw in. For the other one, they used hot glue guns. And before you knew it, he had made an entirely new toy that was suited to his hand. And the rule is, if you make it something new, you get to take it home. And so he took it home. It was an amazing, empowering thing to watch. Taking stuff apart is great. Now, we live in an era of disappearing public spaces for kids. We have these two contradictory fears, fear of children and fear for children. That means that there's really no place where kids are allowed to be in either the virtual or the physical world. In England, where I live, in the world of fear for and of children, the fear of children thing manifested itself in something called the mosquito. A guy developed a tone box that emitted a high-pitched tone that could only be heard by young ears, because you lose the top end of your hearing year by year. And the idea was that mall owners could play extremely loud, high-pitched tones that only teenagers could hear to keep them away. Can you imagine? What if I said, oh, I've developed a high-pitched tone that only Jews can hear? People would be incredibly outraged. Or that blacks could hear, that queer people could hear, whatever. Nobody would allow you to develop that technology and sell it to deal with your Jewish problem, right? But if you say, oh, I've got a kid problem, and I've developed a thing that only children can hear, it's a kid repellent, and I'm going to put it in my mall, they're like, that's awesome. So we live in this era also where we say to kids, well, you're not allowed in public places. And we don't want you out in public places where you are allowed, like parks, because of stranger danger, which is like this statistical outlier. You know, the Dana Boyd, who's this great social scientist, used to do this great slide presentation where it was a series of pie charts that all looked like Pac-Man. So imagine you've got Pac-Man here, and the big yellow part, this is danger to children. The big yellow part is parents, right? The mouth is everybody else. And she says, all right, let's take parents out of the picture. And you get another Pac-Man chart when you take parents out of the picture, and it's like relatives and close friends of parents. All right, we'll exclude those, and you take them out, and then it's like teachers and people in positions of authority and pastors. And like after you get through all the people that you hang around with who are actually the gravest danger to your kids statistically, the Pac-Man mouth of the Pac-Man mouth of the Pac-Man mouth of the Pac-Man mouth is strangers. But on the grounds of defending kids from the strangers, the Pac-Man, this sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a sliver, we say to them, well, don't go to the public park and don't go out on your own. And so we keep them indoors, and then we say to them, but you know, the internet's full of creeps. I don't want you on the internet either, right? We've essentially like zeroed out places where kids are allowed to go. How cool would it be if the most welcoming public space for kids was one that had a mission of breaking things until you understood them, infusing a generation with the idea, that if you can't open it, you don't own it. Let me just get some water here. I think this kind of technical literacy is really a vital mission for librarianship and an important public service. This idea of understanding at some important technical way how the computers around us work. I've said before in other events that I've done here that the world is really made out of computers. You know, if you take the computers out of McCormick Place, it is immediately uninhabitable. If you leave the computers out of McCormick Place for any appreciable length of time, it will be permanently uninhabitable, right? This building is a computer we're just putting our bodies into for the day, right? We have computers in our bodies, hearing aids, pacemakers, implanted defibrillators, increasingly more. I had to fight in an airline lounge with a guy for a plug a couple of months ago, and I already had the plug, and he said, can I use that? And I said, no, I'm charging my laptop. And he rolled up his pants leg and said, I need to charge my leg. I was like, I'm sorry, Mr. Cyborg, you're right, this is definitely your spot, and how awesome is your leg? And so we live in this world made of computers, and what that means is that every problem we have will involve a computer because everything we do will involve a computer. And if the copyright wars have taught us one thing, it's that when a problem involves a computer, the immediate response of lawmakers is, make me a computer that can run every program except for the program that upsets me. And we don't have a theoretical model for that. The computers we use, they're all descended from a set of concepts that were codified at the Princeton Institute and in Bletchley Park during World War II and the years after World War II. Ideas like von Neumann machines and Turing completeness. And what these principles hold at their core is that we know how to make a computer that can execute every program that we can express in symbolic language, but not a computer that can express every program in symbolic that we can express in symbolic language except for the one you don't like. And our closest approximation for it is a computer with spyware on it out of the box. Not a computer so an iPhone is not a computer that can only run programs that came from the App Store. It's a computer that can run every program and has hidden processes that you can't terminate that when you try to run a program that doesn't come from the App Store says, I can't let you do that, Dave. You know, that's what that computer is, right? And, you know, there are really good reasons not to want your computers to keep secrets from you because, you know, our computers see us in the toilet. They sit on our bedstand. They know who all of our friends are and what we say to them. They know where we are at every moment. And I'm not even talking about the NSA spying on you. You know, last year the FBI busted a string of these weirdos called sextortionists who would trick women on social media into installing Trojans on their computers that would give them access to the cameras and hard drives. They would look for compromising photos and then blackmail them into putting on sex shows over Skype. I mean, it is creepy. And so you want your computer to not hide secrets from you. Right? You don't want your computer to be designed so that if you have the right credential, you can run a program on that computer that is adverse to the owner's interests, and the computer will blithely swear up and down, lying through its silicon teeth, that that program isn't there. Right? A user should be able to terminate every process on every computer that she uses. Otherwise, the danger is really grave. Now, the only way we're going to acquire that intuition about Turing completeness, the only way we're going to understand this important matter of theory and be able to resist ongoing calls to lock down computers. Because frankly, although, it's easy to think when you're in the library world and in the sort of internet nerd copyright world that the entertainment industry are really big and powerful, they're not, right? Like, what happens when Monsanto needs to selectively break your computer, or when Esso needs to selectively break your computer? I mean, there are powerful interests out there who make the copyright lobby look like a bunch of clowns, right? And so we are going to, this is not the end of the information wars. The copyright wars were the first skirmish of a 100-year war over the destiny of computers. And our population, our patrons, are going to have to understand that when a lawmaker says, I found a problem and I propose to fix it by selectively breaking your computer, that that's not the right answer. And the best way to understand that is to know how computers work. And the best way to understand how a computer works, like right in your bones, that awesome German word, Fingerspitzengefühl, which means fingertip feel. To have the fingertip feel of computers is to have built one. Even if that's not the computer you end up using, even if you go and you buy one, if you can build a computer, you're like the samurai who can make his own sword. Once you know how computers work, you are positioned to see, critique, and improve the invisible factors that act on our use of information. The network filters, the weird patent restrictions. If you've got a 3D printer in your library, how many of you have 3D printers in your libraries? You guys are so awesome. Have you noticed that your 3D printer, if it's a wire extrusion printer like a MakerBot or a RepRap, you've noticed that they're very sensitive to breezes, right? Because if the plastic cools down while the nozzle is going around, then the next layer doesn't stick properly. But none of them have windbreaks. They're all open to the elements. Why is this device that's sensitive to breezes open to the elements? It's because putting sides on a 3D printer is patented. Right? So information literacy requires understanding this stuff in the round. How do you come to appreciate that software and hardware patents that are granted without any serious examination by the patent office are a danger and an embarrassment to a civilized society? By having a 3D printer that you sweat over as print after print fails because of errant breezes, and realizing the reason you can't put plastic on the side of it is because the patent office said this was a novel idea that was non-obvious to a practitioner of the art, right? And the patent office is wrong, right? It is useful, but it ain't novel, and it's certainly obvious. And so, by the way, you can put your own sides on. Just Sugrue them up there, or print out a little clip that make Thingiverse is full of clips to clip sides onto your 3D printers. Understanding, building computers, programming computers is critical to understanding algorithms. Now, algorithms these days are running more and more of our lives. An algorithmic assessment of your social network world can be used to give you or take away a mortgage. We've seen the NSA putting people on no-fly lists on the strength of algorithms. And most of us don't understand how they work. And when we do understand how they work, we assume that because they are mathematic, they're somehow objective, right? The computer has looked onto Plato's wall, and it has seen that the one true top Google result for this query is this web page, and that's why Google put it there, because it is objective. And it's not until you programmed a computer that you realize that it's a purely editorial decision, that although numbers are figuring out what goes on the front page of a query for Google, that the way those numbers got there is some programmer or a group of programmers wrote some code, ran it against some test cases, and said, that doesn't look right. It would be more aesthetically pleasing to me if I change it in some other way. In that sense, the front page of a search result on Google is no different from the masthead of a magazine, right? Yes, the editor who assembles the masthead of the magazine, TOC of the magazine, is doing so directly, and the programmer is doing it through a stage of indirection, but they're both editorial jobs. And it's no more the case that a programmer isn't doing something editorial because she's written some code than it's the case that the editor isn't doing something editorial because she hasn't set the type herself. Right? These are editorial tasks, and the only way to gain that network literacy and feel it in your heart and understand it is to build computers and program computers and make them dance to your tune. The invisible critical infrastructure of our century is treated these days as the province of wizards and industrialists and hermetically sealed with no user-serviceable parts inside. So, damn right, libraries should not be book-lined internet cafes. They should be book-lined, computer-filled information dojos where communities come together to teach each other black belt information literacy, where initiates work alongside novitiates to show them how to master the tools of the networked age from the bare metal up. Thank you. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. I'll remind you that a long rambling statement followed by what do you think of that is technically a question, but it's not a good one. Thank you. There's a microphone over there, and go crazy. Oh, I think someone's coming, or maybe they're just leaving. It's because that was really non-controversial and totally obvious, and nobody disagrees with any of it. Besides, librarians never speak their mind.
So how do we reform patent and copyright?
Well, I think that the correct word in that sentence is we. That no one of us can do it, no one action is going to do it. It is a systemic process of helping people to understand that these issues are bigger than mere technical questions affecting some group of hackers that they don't have any connection to. James Boyle, does everyone here, who knows about Jamie Boyle? Some of you do. James Boyle, if you want to read someone who's been right on about this stuff for 20 years and doesn't get nearly enough good press for it, read James Boyle. He came up with the idea of something called network ecology. So he says back in the 70s, before we had the word ecology, there were people who cared about whales, and there were people who cared about the ozone layer, and there were people who cared about redwoods, and there were people who cared about pollution. But they didn't know they all cared about the same thing because the word ecology wasn't in common use. The word ecology bound all these things together. When we start to understand that we exist in an information ecology, when we understand that we exist in a knowledge ecology, where, for example, when the military decides to weaponize a vulnerability in an embedded system and make Stuxnet, rather than telling the company that made that embedded system about the vulnerability so that they can patch it everywhere, that you end up with systems all over the world that have a vulnerability that the government knows about and that anyone else who's independently discovered it knows about, that are just sitting there waiting for someone to attack them. Now consider that the controllers that Stuxnet attacked, SCADA controllers, they're everywhere. A 747 is a flying Sun Solaris workstation connected to some badly secured SCADA controllers. If you fly in 747s, when the NSA decides not to tell the world about the vulnerabilities it's discovered in SCADA controllers, they're putting your life at risk, right? We exist in a single networked ecology. And so getting people to understand that is how we are going to solve this fight. I mean, there are lots of instrumental, tiny ways that will make this happen. EFF will litigate questions. The Free Software Foundation will make software. The Software Freedom Law Center will review licenses and litigate key cases. Brewster will bring lawsuits. One after another will do this. But these are not to solve the problem. These are to change our consciousness so that we can solve the problem, to create the consciousness among the people around the world that networks and computers are what our world is made out of, and that their destinies are all entwined, that you can't break a computer a little bit only in one domain, that everything is made of computers and made of the same computers, and that we have to know about them all. I mean, Sony in 2005 shipped the Sony rootkit. They shipped out 6 million audio CDs that had software on them that would covertly install itself on your PC when you put it in your CD-ROM drive, and then change your operating system so that it was blind to the software that it then installed to stop you from copying the CD. And as soon as they did that, and is widely known, and there were 300,000 US military and government networks that were infected with it, virus writers started writing viruses that attacked by using the same mechanism. So they hid themselves using the same mechanism that Sony had installed. And the knowledge that this was out there was in labs at Princeton for several months before it was disclosed, because Princeton's lawyers were worried that if their computer science department published on this, that they would come under legal fire for telling people how to break DRM. And so here you have this like complex set of vulnerabilities arising. You have, national defense vulnerabilities arising because of copyright, and not just because of copyright, but because of a specific copyright law that was particularly badly considered, the DMCA and its anti-circumvention provisions. And these are all tied together in the same way that the ozone layer and global warming and ocean acidification and so on are all part of the same story. Brewster.
Can you speak a little bit about both making money but also giving things away, and how might librarians participate in that sphere?
So making money and giving things away. Do you mean like my books, how I make money? Yeah. Okay. I mean, lots of people make money, but so all my books are available as Creative Commons downloads around the same time they're published. I try to do day and date, but I'm usually on tour when the book is published, and there's always like problems with the website I built for the book at the last minute. So sometimes it takes a week, but around the same time, my books are made available, and they're made available under CC licenses for three important reasons. Now, the first one is financial. And I figure that there are more people out there who don't buy my books because they've never heard of them than people who don't buy my books because they got a free download. And so that promotion is very important. And since the cost of distributing an ebook is zero, it doesn't hurt me if the books land somewhere where they don't generate a sale. And provided that the net sales are greater than the lost sales, I'm out of the game. And so far it's worked. Homeland, my last book, was on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 weeks. It's just come out in the UK. It's doing really well there. And so, it's or rather Pirate Cinema's just come out in the UK and doing really well there. So, that so far has worked, and I think that's important. And I'm developing some new tools to help with that. I'm paying some software developers I know to develop a set of open licensed code to do a kind of name your price humble bundle style thing for authors who work with major publishers. So the way that it's going to work is when you come to the website to download a book, it's going to say, would you like to pay for this book? Name your price for it, and here's some suggestions for how much you should pay. So it's going to look at everything it can find out about you from the session, where you are, what operating system you're using, what book you're downloading, and it'll say, you're a Mac user. Mac users are on average giving $9 a book. They're lagging Team Linux by about $2. And you can tell me how you want that money understood. So there'll be some sliders underneath for like how many of those dollars do you want to give to the fact that it's CC licensed, and to the fact that it's DRM free, and the fact that I help people buy copies for libraries and schools and all of that. And you get to move those sliders around to vote with your wallet, and I make all that stuff public and available. And I call it the Shut Up and Take My Money project. And the reason it's called Shut Up and Take My Money is because it doesn't care what currency you're buying in, where you're from, or what system you want to use to buy it. All it does is it takes the money from whoever wants to buy these books, and then on the back end it goes, oh, well, this was from a British guy. The British publisher then gets 70%, the standard retail split of that payment. I get 30% because I'm the retailer. And it remits to them. So instead of this crazy thing where you go to Amazon to buy a book and it says, you can't buy the book at Amazon, you have to buy the book at this other Amazon over there, and it just shuts up and takes your money, right? Like if you have to explain to people where they have to go to buy this thing when they're standing there with money in their hand, you've already failed, right? So I'm building the Shut Up and Take Your Money project, and I think we're going to roll it out in the fall, and if it works, and it works well, we're going to kickstart paying the developers to turn it into something that anyone can use, and then we'll just GPL it. I hope that someone will run it as a service, because there's, it's nice that I've got it on, I can run my own server, but there's lots of writers out there who don't run their own servers, so it'd be nice to see that as a service. It's not a business I want to get into, but it'd be cool to see someone else do it. So that's part one. There's two other really important parts to this story, though. The second one is artistic, because it's the 21st century, and if people like art, they're going to copy it. It's not like copying is ever going to get any harder. Like today, June the 30th, 2013, this is as hard as copying will ever be. Mark your calendars, right? Your grandchildren will sit around the Christmas table with you and say, tell me again, Grandma, tell me again, Grandpa, about June the 30th, 2013. When you couldn't go into a Walgreens and buy 6 thumb drives for $1, each of which big enough to hold all the video, all the music, all the stories, every word ever spoken. Tell me again when networks were slow and hard to use, and when every person in the world didn't know the magic incantation Batman space BitTorrent. Tell me again when copying was hard. So contemporary art that's not designed to be copied is not contemporary. And there's nothing wrong with not being contemporary. I like retro stuff. I'm all for atemporality. If you want to be like the blacksmith at a Civil War reenactment, that's awesome. If you want to make your own rabbit skin gesso in an egg cup and paint in oils, go to it. Woo the muse of the odd. I'm all over it. But science fiction writers are meant to be at the very least contemporary, if not futuristic. And so I do this for an artistic reason too. And then the final reason is moral. Because not just because of the hypocrisy, although the hypocrisy galls, because I copy, you copy, we all copy, we are that which copies. 4 billion years ago, there was nothing but inert matter on the earth, and then through a process we don't understand, some of it started copying itself. We are descended from those molecules. We have a name for things that don't copy. We call them extinct. When my daughter was born, my parents came over. I live in London. My family lives in Toronto. My parents came over to see their granddaughter. My mom has got a PhD in early childhood ed. She's like the baby whisperer, and my daughter was maybe a week old, 2 weeks old, and she said, "You stuck your tongue out at her yet?" And I said, "No, Mom, I haven't stuck my tongue out at my newborn yet." She said, well, you should hear. And she took her granddaughter in her arms, and she did this. Now, here's the thing you need to understand. My daughter at that point, she wasn't very coordinated. She hadn't seen herself in a mirror. If she touched her tongue, it was purely incidental. She didn't, in some important sense, even know she had a tongue. But when her grandmother did this, she did this. Because we copy like we nuzzle for the breast. Right? Copying is inbuilt. So to rail against copying, especially when I was 17, I copied everything I could with every hour that God sent, right? If it wasn't for mixtapes, I would have been a virgin into my late 20s. And so to say, when I did it, it was part of my legitimate artistic course, but when you do it, you're a parasite and a thief, galls, right? But it's not just the hypocrisy. It's the fact that writers have become human shields in this campaign to selectively break our computers and pave the way to them doing things that are really not pleasant. And so by insisting on being copy native, on being copyable, I don't contribute to that problem. Maybe I'm not solving it, but at least I'm not part of the problem. I figure ultimately, when the cost of copying goes as low as it has, that the reproductive strategy has to stop being like a mammal's reproductive strategy, because mammals, it's expensive for us to copy ourselves. It has to be like a dandelion's reproductive strategy, right? Dandelions, they produce 2,000 seeds, and they blow them into the air without any regard for where they go. And they do so not because they want every seed to germinate, but because they want every crack in every pavement to have a dandelion growing out of it. I don't care if everybody who downloads my books and reads them pays. I want to be sure that everybody who's willing to pay reads my books, right? And that's what it means to be alive in the age of copying. So thanks for your question, Brewster. Next question.
In the wake of the NSA controversy, we heard a lot about metadata. So I wonder what you think the proper use or the best use of metadata is today and then going forward.
What's the best use of metadata today and then going forward? Well, that's which metadata, right? I mean, I think the one thing that we need to do is stop talking about metadata, especially the kind of signals intelligence that the NSA and GCHQ and MI5 gather, as though it were of no consequence. I'm actually, my next Guardian column, which I've got to write when I get back to London next week, is called Winston Churchill, Alan Turing, and Theresa May, a play in one act. And Theresa May is the Home Secretary. And in this play, she is Winston Churchill. She's Alan Turing's line manager at Bletchley Park during World War II when he's trying to crack the Nazi codes. And she's reporting bad news to the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. And she says, "Mr. Churchill, I have terrible news to report. My team have worked as hard as they can, but they can't crack the German codes or give us anything useful. All they can tell us is who's speaking, where they're speaking, what the subject line is, who else is listening, where they go after they talk, how often they speak, what equipment they use to speak, but nothing of any strategic value." Right? We need to stop pretending that metadata isn't compromising. Of course metadata is compromising. And in the EU right now there's this data protection wrangle for the next version of the Data Protection Act. And a lot of the emphasis, and it's hellishly complicated, there's something like 4,000 amendments that have been tabled to the Data Protection Act. And it's the most lobbied the EU has ever been. A lot of big American internet companies there lobbying for weaker data protection rules. And a lot of the focus has been on the rules for handling personal identifying information. And when I looked at this, I saw that there was two regulatory regimes, effectively. There is what you do with personal identifying information, and then what you're allowed to do after you've anonymized that information. There's no definition of what anonymizing the information is. It just says, like, if you can do a thing that has a colorable claim to have anonymized that information, you get to go into this regulatory bucket. And that regulatory bucket has no bottom. You can do anything you want with information once it's been, quote, anonymized. So I asked all these computer scientists I know. I'm not a computer scientist. I just play one. I've got an honorary degree in computer science from the Open University. But my colleagues there have actual degrees in computer science. And they laughed. I mean, the idea that information can be de-identified and still have lots of useful granularity and can't be re-identified is an interesting theoretical question in computer science, in the same way that, here's my math joke, that does P equal NP is an interesting theoretical question. All the computer scientists just laughed. Everyone else is like, P equals NP is this incredible, is this thing that no one's ever been able to prove, and it has to do with complexity, and if we can solve it, it would make a lot of things a lot easier, not least getting traveling salesmen on their optimal route and packing knapsacks. So computer scientists basically think that this is like in the realm of impossibility, and yet the regulatory regime has clearly been designed to encourage companies to just wave some pixie dust over their information, declare it anonymized, and then do whatever the hell they want with it. And so I guess this is by way of saying that metadata is like, there is no one canonical set of rules that work for metadata, and there are lots of different kinds of metadata. So I was talking with some of the ALA National people yesterday about the Authors and Libraries program, this campaign. And one of the things I was saying is that publishers have almost no data about their ebooks. So how does a publisher know how their ebooks are selling? 90 days after the sale is recorded, Amazon tells them, right? Or Google tells them, or Apple tells them. This is crazy, right? Amazon, who is technically a competitor of the publishers, knows to the second how many books have been sold and to whom and under what circumstances and what other books were bought. Publishers know nothing. So what if libraries could have an arm's length 501c3 that reproduced Overdrive in open source software, and that produced aggregated statistics that you could give back to publishers? And we were talking about how important how detailed those statistics could be before they were re-identifiable. And I think you could, for example, say this is how many copies and where, and also these are the books that are correlated with as checkouts with that book where P equals greater than 0.5, where we think there's a relationship between them. And I think that would be good metadata that would have no privacy implications. I think, on the other hand, these are here is a list of checkouts that include your book, and all the other books that were checked out at the same time by the same patron with no other information would be trivial to re-identify and is metadata that should be treated like plutonium. And so it really depends. I don't think there is like a unitary metadata. Yeah.
My question has to do with makerspaces again. I've seen a lot of kids sort of step away from technology because they feel like they don't have any power over it. Mm-hmm. Do you have like a strategy for making, say, teens feel like they do have power over their machines?
I think breaking stuff. I'm totally like that's, I've seen, I mean, Maker Kids goes all the way up to 18, and they really have figured out that the gateway drug to making stuff is breaking stuff. Just take it apart. If you can't open it, you don't own it. And giving people an environment in which they're allowed to break things and encouraged to break things is the first step to getting them to experiment. You have to have a low cost of failure to have creative experiments that lead to success. Yeah.
Okay. When you fly on a plane, they tell you if you leave your cell phone on, it will make the plane unable to navigate. So I have a two-part question. One, is that true? Uh-huh. And two, are there terrorists who are weaponizing cell phones?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is always my point. It's like, shh, don't tell Osama. Right? If it were really true that leaving your iPad on would make airplanes fall out of the sky, presumably they would do more than just tell us to turn them off. And when the FAA investigates this, as they do from time to time, because, the one interesting thing about aviation, civilian aviation, is that there are a lot of rich and powerful people who use it, unlike a lot of other heavily regulated regions, and you can buy your way out of the consumer aviation world, but private jets are really expensive. There's a lot of senators and congressmen who use civil aviation, and so crazy rules about civil aviation are one of the few areas where you can have this like nightmarish authoritarian complex that applies to rich people, and rich people have agency, and so sometimes sometimes the establishment can relieve that pressure of rich people not being happy about something by creating like the TSA frequent flyer line where, basically if you fly a lot, which is to say if you're rich, you get to use that line a lot and you don't have to go through the porno scanner and whatever. The device thing, like, captains of industry hate the fact that they have to put away their Kindles when the plane is taking off, and they make a lot of noise. And so I think that, like, maybe that rule, of all the dumb aviation rules, I think that's the one that may be the shortest lived, ultimately. We'll see. I hope. Other questions?
I hate mics. What do you feel about terms and conditions?
T's and C's.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi. Let me think of how to frame this. So let's start by saying that I'm not opposed to copyright. In the sense that copyright has historically been, the process of copyright has been to observe what the entertainment industry is doing, codify it, and turn it into law that regulates the entertainment industry. Nothing wrong with an industry having rules. Like, imagine how awesome the bank industry would be if they had rules, right? So the proxy that we've used for are you in the rules is are you making or handling a copy? And that was pretty good when copying implied industrial apparatus, right? When every film had a film lab in its provenance, when every record had a record pressing factory in its provenance, when every book had a printing press in its provenance. It is no longer a good proxy for are you part of the industry. And Jamie Boyle, again, talks about this. He says, copyright used to be a tank mine that only blew up if you drove over it with a record pressing factory. Now it's a landmine that blows up when 12-year-olds go over it with their fan fiction, right? I think that the biggest problem we have with copyright now is that we've had hyperinflation in copying, right? Like, copying is something all computers do is copy. Computers are made of copying. Before you get behind the mic, I've been told this is the last question. I'm sorry. Maybe you can catch me afterwards. Sorry about that. So the first thing that I would say is that it would be whatever rules copyright is going to have, I don't think they should apply to people who aren't in the entertainment industry or part of that ecosystem. Because there is no set of rules that is on the one hand nuanced and complex and technical enough that Universal can use them to regulate its licensing of Harry Potter from Warner Brothers to build the Universal Harry Potter theme park, and at the same time simple enough that, like, a 12-year-old in her parents' basement in Joliet can get them right when she makes her Harry Potter fan fiction. And if it's fit for one purpose, it'll be absolutely unsuited to the other. So the first thing I think we need to do is carve copyright out again, right? It has never really applied to all copying. It's only applied to all industrial copying, but the only copying that rose to the level of legal enforcement was industrial copying because it was undetectable otherwise. And the fact that, technically you weren't supposed to make copies in the 1950s of your records doesn't tell you whether or not it was a just regime for individuals like my grandparents, in the same way that if there's like a rule that says you're not allowed to carve your name on the moon with a laser, the fact that no one's doing it doesn't tell you whether or not the rule makes any sense when it's impossible for everyone to do it. Although those of you with makerspaces should get on that. That's the first thing I'd say. Now, once you get to there, and then we need rules for people who aren't in the entertainment industry, and we actually have tons of rules that aren't copyright rules for people who aren't in the entertainment industry around information, like plagiarism. Now, you get kicked out of university for plagiarism, even if you're plagiarizing Shakespeare. That's not a copyright infringement, right? So we have tons of rules that regulate cultural uses of information that don't apply to industry, and I think that's well and just. So when it comes to terms and conditions, I think that the fact that the entire framework of terms and conditions is wrong, because the rubric for terms and conditions is a copyright license usually, and I just don't think you should have to take a license to access information if you're just a person. I think that's completely unsuitable. And there are complex arrangements that industries have that individuals don't have with them. Banks have rules governing their relationship with each other that are much different and more complicated than the rules for banks dealing with their depositors. And in the same way, I think the entertainment industry just shouldn't act like we all have copyright lawyers who read those agreements for us. And so that's the first thing. And they are unjust on their face. They're also unjust because they're farcical, right? If you read them, they don't even look like the kind of copyright agreement that two industry bodies would make between each other, two participants in the industry would make between each other. They all boil down to, by being dumb enough to use the service, you agree that we're allowed to, come over to your house and punch your grandmother and eat all your food, and wear your underwear and make long-distance calls, right? I agree, and so they are universally unjust on their face. And so again, I think that they're bad. And then they're especially bad because in 1986, Congress passed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and decided that they would future-proof their anti-hacking laws by saying, we're not going to define what this act prohibits. We're just going to say if you exceed your authorization, you're a felon. And prosecutors and federal cops have decided that this means that if you violate the terms and conditions, which we all do, you're a felon. And this is this is bogus, right? Because a nation of people who are presumptive felons is a nation with no justice. It's a nation where prosecutorial discretion is the major factor in your ability to conduct your life with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a place under the rule of man and not under the rule of law. And we saw that. We saw that with a Chicagoan last year. A friend of some of ours who is also a hero, a kid named Aaron Swartz, who took too many books out of the library. Right? He downloaded 1 million articles from JSTOR and it violated the terms and conditions. And a federal prosecutor said that she wanted to put him in jail for 35 years. Off the back of taking too many books out of the library. Now, 97% of the people who get an indictment in this country plead guilty. And that's not because we have bred a race of super psychics prosecutors who only get it wrong 3% of the time. It's because we have a horrific, heavily privatized prison system that is so gross that even the Supreme Court has started ordering prisoners released because it is inhumane just to be in the building. And people who are threatened with 25 years inside plead out to 3. And so the terms of service are an incredibly problematic thing, not just because they're unfair and not just because copyright shouldn't apply as we understand it to civilians, but also because the proliferation of terms of service has resulted in a situation where any one of us could have what happened to Aaron happen to us. And so, I think that they are a really horrific evil. They're a kind of self-replicating plague of idiocy. People don't even read them before they put them on their websites. Lawyers don't read them. My email sig reads, read carefully. By receiving this email, you agree on behalf of your employer to release me from all non-negotiated agreements without prejudice to my ongoing rights and privileges. You further agree that you have the right to release me from these agreements. And so that it's about as fair as as any other license agreement you've ever agreed to. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon, and I hope you enjoyed Cory's talk. I would like to take a couple moments to thank people. I know they're streaming out, but none of this happens in a vacuum. There are a lot of people that go into making these kinds of programs work and to making a successful association. And this is my LITA President's Program, and I do want to take a moment to thank the people who worked on this. So if you can stay for that, it's not going to take very long, but it would be very appreciative, and show your fellow association members that courtesy. So I would like to take a moment to thank and have these people stand. Your LITA board members, can you, and I'm not going to name everyone because I can already tell people are just like out of here, but if the LITA board members could please stand. Thank you so much for your hard work on behalf of your division. I want to thank the LITA staff members, Melissa Prentice, Mary Taylor, and Valerie Edmonds. These people work very, very hard for you. The IG chairs and the committee chairs do a lot of work of the association, and really, really, we want to show our appreciation. If you're here and can stand, I would really appreciate it. And I do want to let people know that if you were really, really interested in some of the makerspace stuff that Cory was talking about, that's going to be one of the major tracks at the LITA Forum that's going to be held in Louisville in November. Have I got it? I'm getting closer every time. I'm getting closer. So please check the LITA website and look for that. We're going to we have 2 keynoters that are going to be speaking on makerspace. We're going to be talking. We're going to have a track on that and programs on it, and we're going to be looking at other opportunities related to that. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you, Cory, for your inspiring and